Hello and welcome to another episode of the Liberator Podcast. I'm Sam Riley. I'm here with James Silberman, and no Russell Hunter this week, but this week we're going to be responding to Ronnie Rogers, who's got a long history with the abolitionist movement, actually going back all the way to the beginning.
Yep.
So we're just going to be going through his article and giving an abolitionist response to it.
Yeah, so as Sam mentioned, Ronnie's someone who had a lot of interaction with abolitionists early on. There were some abolitionists in his church. He talks about that a little bit in the article, but most of this article is just giving giving his refutation of the abolitionist position. And so he titles it, Why I Am an Incrementalist / Eliminationist and Not an Abolitionist. And so actually in the first point here that we're going to get into that eliminationist. Why does he call himself that? And so he begins with a few paragraphs, just general stuff, abortion's bad, abortion's unbiblical. But then he gets into the actual anti-abolitionist argument. He says, to maintain a separation from the abolitionists is not tantamount to being any less resolved in the quest to eliminate legal abortion, their comments to the contrary notwithstanding. It is to say that we reject abolitionists' mischaracterizations of the pro-life movement and what it has stood for, fought for, and accomplished. We reject the all-or-nothing approach of the modern abolitionists' movement. It is not a rejection of their goal, but their strategy, tactics, and misrepresentation of the heartbeat of the pro-life movement, what they derogatorily refer to as incrementalism. So he doesn't want to be called an incrementalist. He wants to be called an eliminationist. The problem with that is that evades the whole debate. The whole debate is, are you calling for immediate abolition or are you calling for incremental or gradual abolition? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about incrementalism, we're talking about what the incrementalists themselves have termed themselves. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason they chose incrementalists and not gradualist. And that is because the abolitionists of slavery, such as William Wilberforce, used gradualist as basically a slur. He used that derogatorily. And so they don't want to be gradualists because that's what Wilberforce railed against over and over and over. So they went with incrementalist. And so that's what you are, Ronnie. You are an incrementalist. And we say that, we think it's, we may say that in a derogatory manner because we think the ideas are really bad, but it's not like we're choosing something that's not representative of your position. We are immediatists. You are incrementalists. That's what the debate's about.
Yeah. It doesn't even seem like it should be something that is all that controversial. Most of the time, you never see pro-lifers really taking issue with incrementalism anymore, or that title incrementalism anymore.
Yeah.
It's really, and also if you look up incrementalism, it just says gradualism as a synonym as well. So it wasn't even that sneaky as far as they're trading out the words there. But
right.
It's not something that you should be offended by if that's something that you are doing.
Exactly.
You know, if that's the type of legislation you want to pursue, call yourself it. Just own up to it. You know, It's not that hard to do.
Yeah. The other part in this first excerpt here is the all or nothing approach, right? And so here's what they derogatorily refer and inaccurately refer to abolitionists as all or nothing. We are not all or nothing. We support saving as many as we can along the way at abortion clinics in all sorts of various ways through education, all these things. What we oppose is using unjust means politically, supporting unjust laws that God would not support. Mm-hmm. That's what we oppose. It's not that we oppose the saving of human lives. We oppose compromise politically, compromise on what God's word says the magistrates are to do about abortion.
Yeah.
So it's not all or nothing.
And we're also not seeking a purely pragmatic end. You know, if abortion is illegal, there are still going to be people that kill their babies. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's this mindset of pragmatically saving as many as you can as the goal that would get people to say, oh, you guys are just all or nothing. Like, save all the babies or don't save any at all. Right. No, we're looking for justice. That's the standard. The pro-life movement is not looking for justice. They're not trying to establish that a mother who kills their baby should be criminalized. So even though there may be some individual pro-lifers who will say, I think criminalization is the goal that we should have, for the most part, they're not looking for justice at all. So it's not as though we're of that same pragmatic paradigm saying we're just trying to save as many as we possibly can. Yeah. Rather, we're saying the establishment of justice is what God would have us do, and that's what legislators ought to do. And that's what we should push for.
Right. So moving on through his article here, he says, a couple months ago, I sat through a message by an abolitionist on this issue. He's a good and godly man whom I love and respect, but he demonstrated the same mischaracterization of pro-lifers that I have seen before by other abolitionists. By doing so, he and other like-minded abolitionists end up attacking and misrepresenting those who are some of their most ardent cohorts in the battle against abortion and for the sanctity of human life. They malign those who have fought to minimize the legality of abortion and share their ultimate desire to end or to eliminate legalized abortion. They thereby hurt the cause of saving babies' lives. Now, we did a whole episode, a whole podcast on this, if you go back to podcast number 34, about why we oppose the pro-life movement. But what Ronnie's talking about here is he thinks the pro-life movement should be celebrated, should be praised for the accomplishments that they've done. But when we look at a state like Oklahoma, which is where we are, which is where Ronnie Rogers is, we have a state where pro-lifers control every lever of power in our state government, every lever of power. And so if we're going to go to the magistrates and say abolish abortion, we're not going to pro-aborts. We're not even speaking to pro-aborts. They have no power here in Oklahoma. We're going to pro-lifers. Mm-hmm. We're going to pro-life politicians and the pro-life lobbyists who have their ear. And those pro-life politicians, those pro-life lobbyists have chosen to oppose the bill to abolish abortion. Mm-hmm. So why do we malign and criticize the pro-life leaders and the pro-life movement? Because they are the people standing in the way of the abolition of abortion. Yeah. There's no one else to criticize. There's no reason to go after the pro-choicers.
And we don't really malign them. We just tell the truth about them.
Right.
But who he's talking about there is Blake actually already released a video responding to this, because it's not a secret that he was responding to Blake there.
Yeah.
It's good that he thinks he's a good, godly man. This is not a misrepresentation of anything. We've not been misrepresenting the pro-life movement. Yeah. People are kind of really attached to their accomplishments because it says that, we've been doing things. We haven't just been silent and failing during the Holocaust. We've been actually active. We've done all these bills. We've done all these great things. But when you show what those bills actually are, they don't look all that impressive. Like you've passed a dismemberment abortion ban. You've passed a 20-week ban. Meanwhile, all the babies that were going to die before the 20-week ban still died, just earlier. Right. And if those accomplishments actually aren't accomplishments, they need to be called out. They shouldn't we shouldn't continue to laud them as though they're actually significant things that people should celebrate.
Right. Yeah. The pro-life movement, both politically and the bills they support and the bills they oppose, there's major problems there. There's problems with the very foundation of what they're doing. Right. They're not operating from a biblical foundation. You can see that in the way that they argue, the way they argue on the floor, the way that they argue in the public square against abortion supporters. There are lots and lots of problems with the pro-life movement, and we don't want to go beyond what the problems are and malign beyond what the truth is. But we do need to be accurate and say, this movement, this group of people over here, is opposing the bill to immediately abolish abortion, is not arguing against abortion from a biblical foundation. Mm-hmm. And these are big problems. And again, it's not our intent to malign. It's not our intent to go beyond what's accurate, but what's accurate is harsh. The truth is harsh in this case, and we're going to be as harsh as the truth is, as our podcast frequently says. Yeah. So moving on here through his article, he continues again with the save all or none thing. He says abolitionists operate on a save all or none approach to ending abortion. For example, they will support an abolitionist candidate who has no chance of winning and thereby cost a pro-life candidate the election, who would, if elected, fight to reduce abortion and end abortion. Their support of an abolitionist candidate who cannot win enhances the chance of victory for the vulgar pro-abortionist who will unabashedly promote the idea of abortion as a human right, along with every other unthinkable human debauchery. Pro-lifers operate on a save as many or all approach to ending abortion. For example, we will support a pro-life candidate with a chance of winning who seeks to end abortion and also take every opportunity to reduce the number of abortions until legalized abortion is eliminated. So when Ronnie says here that pro-lifers operate on a save as many or all approach, he is betraying that he doesn't know what he's talking about, unfortunately, because what we have at the Capitol is a bunch of pro-life politicians who support saving one life. Like, let's save as many as we can. Let's support this bill because the idea is that it might save one life. Mm-hmm. And those same politicians kill the bill that would abolish it. Yeah. And then they go to their voters and say, but look, I passed this bill that's going to save maybe a few lives. And then Ronnie is telling those voters to say, yes, great job. You passed a great incremental bill. We're making victory. We're saving as many as we can. Awesome job. Yeah. Like, that is the problem. That's why abortion is still legal, is because there's people in the culture who are saying, yes, these bills are great. We're going to keep voting for you if you keep passing these incremental bills. And
for me, just reading this and hearing this, it's hard to believe that he wrote this today. You know, like maybe he wrote it in 2012 or something like that. But it does not make any sense to me that he wrote it today. Because who is he talking about? You know, the Oklahoma politician who beats out the incumbent Republican isn't going to lose to a pro board. And even if they did, it's not changing anything about the state house. You're still going to have a majority of pro-life Republicans, or not in quotes, pro-life Republicans who are still passing incremental bills. And on the national level, if we're running a candidate, we haven't run it. Free the States hasn't tried to run a candidate or anything like that. But even on the national level, it's not taking away votes in any significant margin from the Republicans. For the most part, abolitionists don't really vote for the pick of Republicans anyways. It's not like we're just going to go that way anyway. So I really don't know what he's talking about. I don't think that he has a real clear target about who this candidate is that's making pro-life politicians lose.
Yeah. This whole section just seems like he doesn't quite have a grasp of the actual subject matter that he's talking about for sure.
Moving on. It says it says in part, he's talking about the resolution in 2021. Resolved that the messengers of the SBC meeting in Nashville, Tennessee, June 15 through 16, 2021, do state unequivocally that abortion is murder, and we reject any position that allows for any exceptions to the legal protection of our preborn neighbors, compromises God's holy standard of justice, or promotes any God-hating partiality. The implications of this wording mischaracterize pro-life battles as allowing for exceptions to legal protection, rather than the reality of seeking to save as many babies as we can at that moment, with an unrelenting passion for saving them all. And this is the kind of ethic that you would see from a atheist. You know, it's anything goes as long as you're accomplishing what your goals are. But you can't say, no, our goal is to save as many babies as possible, while writing a law that says you may murder babies under whatever circumstance. Yeah. That's not the way that you're supposed to operate as a Christian. You're supposed to say, this is God's standard, uphold this standard, and none other. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. Yeah. You're not supposed to say, let me offer you, Pharaoh, a compromise to God's holy law so that I can accomplish my end goal, that is saving as many babies as possible. Right. That's not the way the law is supposed to work, and that's not the way that God works. When we look at God's word, God looks at faithfulness, his people saying and demanding what God would have them demand, not offering something that is lesser than, that God actually hates. He hates partiality. All pro-life bills have in them some kind of partiality, and we should not engage in that.
Yeah, what he's saying here is it's just objectively untrue. So he's saying, no, we're not writing exceptions that allow for abortion. We're saving as many as we can. Well, it's like, no, you're saving as many as you can by writing exceptions into your law that allow for abortion. Yeah. And so then the question is, do the ends justify the means? Can I write an unjust law because my intent is to save as many lives as we can? And if we look at God's word again, like Romans 3, no, you cannot. The ends do not justify the means. We are not at liberty to do that as Christians. And so we're not talking about, and we'll get to this more as we go on here, but we're not talking about their intentions with pro-life laws. We're talking about what the laws objectively do, how they tutor the culture, the impact that they have on the abortion issue and on the consciences of the people. And objectively, these laws are providing exceptions to legal protection. And so again, it just doesn't make any sense that he would try to pretend that isn't the case in these laws. Yeah. And so...
Yep, and he continues on here. Thus, the abolitionists' version just said, we will not embrace an incremental approach to ending abortion. That is an intentional disparagement of the pro-life movement. Stated another way, abolitionists say they defend only the all-or-nothing approach. Abolitionists will only support legislation or other measures that end all abortions. In contrast, pro-lifers will fight and pray for the elimination of abortion, while we simultaneously support legislation or other measures that reduce the number of abortions until all legal abortions stop. Elimination of all abortions at one particular moment and eliminating as many abortions as possible at a given moment are not mutually exclusive, except for the fact that the pro-life movement treats them as mutually exclusive. I mean, that's a big hole in this argument, is that the pro-lifers are the ones who kill the abolition bills. Yeah. They are not the ones who are heralding abolition bills year after year. They're the ones who kill it and then pass a bunch of other incrementalist bills and say, we did a great job. We're doing all that we possibly can for the preborn in any given state. And so it's just I think this is just disingenuous. If you actually look at what is being done, If you're opening your eyes and looking at what the pro-life politicians are doing, you cannot make this argument. Yeah. It just does not work. It is plain, factually wrong. That's not the way that they're operating. You can say that they're ideally not supposed to operate this way, but if you're going to say that, you should be calling on those same politicians in this article to actually support the abolition bill. But that's not what he's arguing here.
Right, and instead, by pretending that it's not happening, he's providing cover for the politicians who are killing the abolition bill. He's pretending that they are doing all that they can do when they're not.
Yeah.
And so that's really, really damaging to the cause. But beyond that, he says that incrementalism or an incremental bill and an abolition bill are not mutually exclusive. And maybe in theory they aren't mutually exclusive, but in practice they are mutually exclusive. Because when you go to a politician and you say, here's two bills and I would support both of these things, what the politician's going to do, if one of the bills is easier to pass and one of them is very difficult to pass, an abolition bill being more difficult to pass, he's going to take the easy one and run with that and pass it every time and not do the harder thing.
Yeah.
And so for as long as we allow them to get away with doing the easier thing, they're never going to do the harder thing. And so in practice, they are mutually exclusive. If you celebrate compromise and incrementalism, you're never going to get the thing you're actually calling for, which is abolition. And so in practice, they are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And so he continues on the SBC resolution here. He's got 3 points, 3 objections that he makes to the SBC resolution that was passed last June. He says, going from the resolution, resolved that we humbly confess and lament any complicity in recognizing exceptions that legitimize or regulate abortion, and of any apathy in not laboring with the power and influence we have to abolish abortion. And then his response to that, he says, this highlights another unnuanced misrepresentation of the pro-life movement. Neither I nor anyone I have known, read, supported, or fought with for 44 years sought to legitimize or regulate abortion. Again, we're not talking about intention. I'm not saying that you desire to legitimize abortion. I'm saying your bills, objectively, the effect of them, the impact of them, is to tell people when, where, and how to murder their children. It's not about your intent. It's about what's in the bill itself. And what's in the bill is the regulation, the legitimization of abortion.
Yeah. And when you read that, sought to legitimize or regulate, and then you read the original that he's reading from, it almost just, you don't even notice the fact that he's inserting that in sought to. Like that was their goal.
Yeah.
We know it's not your goal. That's not the issue.
Yeah.
Your means is the issue.
Right.
You're going about it in a sinful way. It's a way that God says that he hates. He hates partiality. He hates iniquitous decrees. He does not want his people calling on their legislators to do something less than abolish abortion, grant equal protection.
Yeah.
So this argument here, it seems he just wants it to be saying something. It seems like he wants it to be saying something that it isn't, so that it's easier to knock down. We're not saying that they wanted to legitimize abortion. We are saying that has been the practical effect of 50 years of regulating abortion. We're seeing a slip in the culture, and pro-lifers will present this to you in a very shady way, but they'll say 70% of Americans don't want abortion or something like that. And when you actually look at those numbers, it's 70% of Americans want some kind of regulation on abortion. It's not 70% of Americans want to abolish abortion. There's actually a very small percentage of Americans who actually want to see abortion abolished entirely. If you're talking about criminalization, that is a very small amount. Not a lot. It's a very small amount. And that is exactly because of the pro-life politicians passing laws that say you should be able to kill a baby in this case or that case. And they call them pro-life. And a bunch of people who consider themselves pro-life start to think that that's consistent with being pro-life, to regulate abortion and to allow it in the vast majority of cases, but not in such a gruesome way that you see little heads and arms and things like that torn off. If it just looks like a clump of blood or something like that, I'm more okay with it than if you were to show me gory pictures of brutalized babies. So it sanitizes the industry, it makes it more efficient at killing, and it makes it, in the eyes of a lot of people, less bad, even though it's every bit as bad as it always has been. It's always wrong to kill an image bearer of God, regardless of what they look like. And that is what we're talking about when we say they legitimize abortion. They have done it. It's not even a question at this point.
Yeah, and we'll get more into to how that happens, how the laws teach both the culture and even the pro-lifers. People start to internalize, like you said, people start to internalize the bills they're supporting. And so that has a very bad teaching effect on the culture and the pro-life movement. But moving on in his article here, he says Therefore, pro-lifers do not need to lament standing to save some lives, even though we could not save all, any more than those who freed only some slaves or one slave through various measures need to repent, because they could not save all from slavery or end slavery by their efforts. And so what we have here again is the denial of the reality that there was the bill to abolish abortion in Oklahoma. They could have saved all. In the state where both we and Ronnie reside, there was the bill that could have saved all. The pro-life politicians opposed it. As far as I know, Ronnie never spoke in favor of it. He keeps saying, I support, both the incremental bill and the abolition bill. I could be wrong. I don't follow Ronnie Rogers particularly closely, but I've never seen him at any of our rallies for the bill to abolish abortion or speak up publicly in favor of it. And so it just really have to call into question his assertion here that pro-lifers are calling for all. The pro-life politicians are not calling for all. The pro-life lobbyists are not calling for all. Ronnie, I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I will correct the record, but as far as I can tell, is not calling for all, has not called for all, has not lifted one finger to support the bill to abolish abortion here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to see. This is not a new thing. They do this historical sleight of hand where they say, the people working the Underground Railroad trying to save as many slaves as possible, or Schindler trying to save as many Jewish people as he possibly could. The fact is, all of those people were nullifiers, and they were nullifying with their behavior when they tried to save as many human beings as possible. They were disobeying the law of the land. In the case of the Nazis, they were not allowed to save as many Jewish people as they possibly could. Yeah. In the case of the slaves, they were not allowed to save as many slaves as they possibly could. But they did it anyways, in defiance of federal rules, in defiance of their governments. They did it anyways because they knew that the higher law of God was to protect life, not to kill innocent human beings. And they did it against their government. Abolitionists have been saying, we need to abolish abortion in defiance of the Supreme Court right now. That is the nullifier's stance in history. That is exactly what people in the past have done with slavery, people in the past have done with the Holocaust, genocides of all different sorts. They have stood up and they've done the right thing, and they've ignored laws and rules that said that you had to allow for your neighbors to be killed. So this sleight of hand that people do all the time with this, conflating their pragmatic simping for the Supreme Court, is not the same thing as saving as many slaves as you possibly can. It's just not the same thing. The same thing is saying, let's defy the Supreme Court. Let's not listen to them anymore. We don't need to listen to them anymore. And even with the potential situation with the Supreme Court overturning their current ruling, we're going to have people pushing for federal laws regulating what states can do with abortion. We're going to have people in our own state who aren't willing to actually criminalize abortion, and we're going to be saying the same thing. We need to ignore whatever federal rulings come out, whether they try to hurt our budget, whatever they try to do. Yeah, we need to ignore it. And I hope that Ronnie's going to be calling for that when that happens, and not this.
Yep. So next, he does turn to history a little bit, which is interesting because the abolitionists who were at his church were really big on history, and I think he probably should have known better than to go here because his history was not very good in this case. And so his first analogy that he makes, he goes to Oscar Schindler and Corrie ten Boom, and he says, Oscar Schindler and Corrie ten Boom, they were heroes of the Holocaust era. They tried to rescue as many Jews as they could by taking Jews into their homes, into their businesses, and hiding Jews and keeping them from captivity. And they saved a lot of people. And he says they should not be condemned for trying to save as many people as they can. In fact, I'm going to try to get the quote here. He says, "Because we have not been able to overturn Roe and abolish abortion does not mean we need to repent any more than Corrie ten Boom needs to confess hiding and saving some Jews from the Nazis, even though she and her family could not save them all, much less topple the Third Reich. They and history's countless and often nameless other defenders of human life are not failures, nor are they compromisers, because their acts did little when compared to the numbers of those who perished. No, 1,000 times no. They deserve not our criticism or condemnation, but our praise and thanksgiving. We rightly honor them as heroes, as are those who have fought for decades to end abortion in the pro-life movement, or those who fought for centuries to minimize, reduce, and eliminate the presence of slavery, even though they did not live to see that day." There is no analogy between taking Jews into your home to keep them away from the Nazis and supporting a bill that says, here's how to murder your child. So hiding Jews from the Nazis is a good thing to do, just like going to the abortion clinic and trying to save children one by one at the clinic is a good thing to do. That's the analogy. Hiding Jews is like going to the abortion clinic try to convince people not to murder the children.
Yeah.
But there's no analogy between the political aspect of it and the direct action aspect of it. Those are two completely different things.
Yeah. And I think if you also were to look at any of the pro-lifers that we've talked about on this show, any of them in the state house, any legislators, it's such an arrogant comparison to think that they're anything like these people.
Yeah.
They're not. These people would be ashamed of you guys. Like, if they're looking at your bills, being totally subservient to the Supreme Court, just bowing down and allowing 60 million babies to be killed, they'd be ashamed of you. They would not be happy with you. And to make the comparison of yourselves to them is so far off that it's just dishonoring to their name, for one. And secondly, as you say, it's not the same. Direct action and legislation is not the same. I do not think Corrie ten Boom would be asking for a law that says, let's just kill half of the Jews. Let's leave the other half alive. I don't think that she'd be doing that.
Or you can murder Jews by the gas chamber, but you can't murder them by lining them up and shooting them with a gun. Like, you wouldn't regulate how you can do it or which Jews you can murder.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think Corrie ten Boom would have been on board with any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
No, she wouldn't have. And I think that when people make these comparisons, they really want to put us in a tough spot of just being like, oh yeah, they were all wrong for it or something. Yeah. But when you actually look at what they did and the fact that abolitionists of today were inspired by men and women like that, and they began doing abolitionist work because of them and because of what the Word of God says, it's just so absurd. It's like, when I look back at pro-lifers now, pro-life leaders that I know, I just think they must have been ignoring all these stories that they read. They must have been just overlooking massive portions of what they actually had to say about their own actions, because there's no way you can read about what they said and what they did. And you look at all these quotes on the wall. Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. You can't look at these kinds of quotes and then think, that's pro-lifers today. They do that. No, they don't. Yeah. They really don't want to make any demands. They want to go in as easily for themselves as they possibly can and sort of shift persuade and convince the Supreme Court to slowly shift away. You know, even the Supreme Court now, the amicus briefs that were submitted on this more recent case, some of the pro-life organizations who submitted on that stuff submitted really, really weak amicus briefs, asking for things like the 15-week abortion ban being upheld. Like, that is such a weak demand, or request even. It's such a weak request. What you want to say is, ignore this 15-week ban, just ban abortion entirely, don't allow it for anyone in any of the states at all. But they ask for even less than that. They ask for, even in the best cases, the pro-lifers ask for just, let's return it to the states. Let's give it back to the states. Disregard the 14th Amendment, just look at what the states say. So it is incredibly weak, and I really don't think any of these figures from history, looking at them now, would be anything but ashamed of what they're doing. Yeah,
and you mentioned Frederick Douglass there, and that's actually who Rogers turns to next, and he spends a good deal of paragraphs here talking about Frederick Douglass, which is, again, just he doesn't quite understand the historical analogies here, as we'll get into. But he argues that for Frederick Douglass, in the 1856 presidential election, Frederick Douglass did endorse a Republican who was more moderate anti-slavery, as opposed to there was a more hardcore abolitionist by the name of Garrett Smith, who was running with the Liberty Party. And Frederick Douglass originally supported Garrett Smith, but as it got closer to the election, he actually ended up supporting the Republican ticket for president. And his reasoning was, well, Garrett Smith, I love him, he's a great guy, but he doesn't have a chance to win here, and so I'm going to support the Republican candidate. Now, Ronnie used this to say, look, Frederick Douglass used to be all or nothing, but then he came out of that, and he wasn't all or nothing. He ended up supporting the not all or nothing candidate. Now, where he doesn't understand why that analogy doesn't work, Frederick Douglass did not give up his immediatism. Frederick Douglass never forsook, and actually in the writing, in parts of the writing that Rogers actually quotes, Douglass actually says, I am not doing anything to forsake my quote-unquote radical abolitionism. I still love the radical abolitionists. I still count myself among them. I am not putting any distance between myself and the radical abolitionists. What I'm doing is my philosophy of voting has changed slightly. And so that is changing. Now, the thing is, the real rub on abolitionism versus incrementalism is not on voting. It's an important debate, but there are abolitionists who come down in different places on who to vote for. There are abolitionists who say, no, you can only vote for if it's a consistent abolitionist who rejects all incremental bills. I would come down in a place where I could vote for someone as long as they support immediate abolition, even if they were to also support incremental pro-life bills. But the problem is that's a very small amount of people. Most Republicans, they'll say I support everything, but they actually don't. And so I end up not being able to support most Republicans, but that's where I would come down. But in any case, there's some room for debate and philosophy about how we vote as abolitionists. Where there isn't that room for debate is what bills we support.
Yeah.
And so Douglass, he never gets rid of his immediatism. He was always an immediate abolitionist. He was never a gradualist. He spoke year after year after year against incrementalism and gradualism, and he never went back on any of it.
Yeah.
And so Rogers is not proving the point that he thinks he's proving.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, we got to cut this podcast. I didn't know James supported that, so we're just going to have to, part ways here. It's all over now. No, but you do have people who have a different philosophy of how to vote, but the key issue here is, can we call on legislators to support evil bills, bills that God hates? We would all say no. And I think Frederick Douglass would say no as well. He's not a friend of Ronnie Rogers' position here that constantly asks for compromise instead of demanding justice. And, never really demanding justice. If he is someone who actually goes and supports abolition bills, then I would take that back. I've never seen him at anything. I've never seen him speak a word in favor of abolition bills. Yeah. I see pro-lifers do this all the time, where they'll say, we can support both and, but then never practically do a thing to support the abolition bills.
Ronnie's not the only one who does that.
Yeah, there are plenty of people who do that. Our old boss, for one, will say things like he supports the abolition bills and the incremental bills, but he doesn't actually do anything very practical to support those. It's maybe a Facebook post here and there, but it's never actually putting his weight that he knows that he could put behind an abolition bill. He always just sort of says, oh, I support it, sort of in theory.
And usually it's not even that much. In the case of most people that I've talked to, it's, I support both. Let's run all the plays. Let's do all the strategies. And then there's not even a Facebook post. There's nothing. They will not touch the bills to immediately abolish abortion. Mm-hmm. And so that is something that pro-lifers do a lot. The incrementalists do a lot because they're trying to make their position sound more appealing to people who aren't sure about incrementalism or abolitionism, but they don't. They don't actually support both 99% of the time. Yeah. So that's just not the case. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and hopefully Ronnie Rogers comes to a place where he actually does support abolition bills and stops supporting iniquitous decrees. Yeah. Do we have a final point on that?
Yes. So one last excerpt that we are going to read from this article here. This is right near the end of it, kind of summing up everything he said so far. He says, legislation can slow or reduce the evil, carnage, and brutality of slavery and abortion. So why not support it if it can? Laws have a tutorial effect. Yes, they do. Why not save babies at a particular stage of growth, even if we cannot at that time save all? Am I to say no? I will not support legislation that potentiates saving thousands or even millions of babies because it does not save them all. I, for one, will not speak so callously. So here he's going further than saying abolition is wrong. He's saying abolitionism is callous toward the babies who we're sentencing to death. No, what's callous is these pro-life politicians saying, no, we're not going to abolish abortion. We'll tell people how to murder their children in this way or that way. And then people like you, Ronnie, saying, yes, great job saving as many as you could, given the realities at the time. Yeah. No, the realities at the time is we have pro-lifers in control of every single lever of power in our state. Mm-hmm. And for us to endorse them and support them or celebrate them for doing anything less than using the complete and total power that they have to abolish abortion, to not use that power to abolish abortion, to celebrate them for that, that's what's callous. Yeah. It's callous, it's stupid, it's insane, and it's why babies are still murdered. Hopefully that's coming to an end soon, but that it's gone on for this long. We had the bill to abolish it back in 2016. We've had the bill to abolish it. So for the last 6 years, it's on the pro-lifers. The pro-lifers could have abolished it any year in that period. Yeah. And they didn't.
And it's really ironic that you have someone saying that abolitionists are callous when the bills that you're supporting, you literally have to stomach a lot of the times the fact that they include rape exceptions in them. You're just going to have to choke, you're just going to have to keep that down. Any violation of your conscience there, just don't worry about it. We're just trying to get the popular appeal of keeping a rape exception there. And think about that. That is a fatherless child. If there ever was a fatherless child, it is the child conceived in rape. And God hates it when fatherless children are harmed, when they're done wrong, when they're murdered. God hates it. And you're calling abolitionists calloused for saying that we're not going to put up with that. We're not going to put that in our bills. We're not going to go with any of your bills if it's got that in it. We think that's wrong. And to say that this is the callous thing, to not just stomach your indignation at that kind of exception put in your bills, is just insane. We're not being callous. We want you to actually be soft-hearted enough to care for every single one of your preborn neighbors and support an abolition bill. But it's callousness to put in exceptions for preborn children who are murdered because their father was a despicable, evil person. That's callous. You have to be callous to a certain degree to do that. Yeah. So just, he's the one who's casting aspersions on abolitionists and maligning us. Really, I think it's just him having a guilty conscience, knowing that what we're saying is right, and then spewing this kind of nonsense because he feels guilty. I think he feels guilty. I think that when he looks at the abolitionist bills, he sees a righteous standard, and he wants to say they're just being calloused because they're not going to support the bills that I support, even though his bills are wicked. The bills that he would support have evil exceptions in them that we should not support. They are not equal justice, and we should reject that outright.
Yeah, and there's no reason not to. Again, the idea that we would have to support, we'd have to hold our nose to support that sort of bill for it to pass in a state like Oklahoma is not the case.
Yeah.
If this is a state where everyone and their mom professes to be a Christian, right? You can't get elected if you're not. We can hold these people to the standard of God's word. If enough of us did, it would have been over long ago.
Yep. And
the only reason hasn't already been ended is because we haven't been holding them to that standard. We've been celebrating them for doing less. We've been celebrating them for compromising and being the very people who are keeping abortion from being abolished.
Yep.
And so for all of those reasons, he's wrong. He's wrong that we're callous. He's wrong that we can't abolish abortion. He's wrong that we're all or nothing. He's wrong about Frederick Douglass and Corrie ten Boom. This was not a very carefully written article, and we hope that he watches this and reconsiders.
Yep.
And one other thing I did want to mention, Russell isn't on the podcast, and he would be able to speak more to this if he were here. We weren't there back in 2011 when the split happened. So I mentioned that Ronnie has a history with abolitionists. There were abolitionists who were some of the early abolitionists in his church, and there was basically a church split, and they were basically removed from the church by Ronnie and some of the other leaders of the church. And in this article, where do we have it here?
It's somewhere in here. Just give us 1 second. We're almost there. Let the man read.
Yeah. He says, all right, their attitude and spirit that their way alone is right permeated their approach to other issues as well, which ultimately resulted in many of them being church disciplined by our church and eventually removed several years ago. This same attitude is often reflective of the abolitionist movement. For the story on that, again, Russell will be able to speak to it more if you were here, but you can go back and watch episode 3 of the podcast where Russell talks about how the abolitionist movement got up and running. And that's not something I would have brought up if Rogers hadn't brought it up, but he did bring it up. And so just kind of in defense of the Hunters and some of the other early abolitionist families, I would recommend to everyone to go back and watch episode 3 just for the real story of what kind of happened with some of the abolitionists at Trinity Baptist here in Norman, where Ronnie Rogers is the pastor.
Yep.
So...
Yeah, and we try to keep this a short, concise episode for you guys this week. In case you didn't notice, I am editing live right now, and the only reason I'm able to do that, it's going to be a huge time saver for us. The only reason I'm able to do that is because of you guys supporting us, and actually we fundraised for the new cameras, which came in, and they're here. So thank you guys so much for that. For our monthly donors, we try to... give back as much as we can. You get 15% off in the store if you support us monthly. And also you get entered for a drawing, to win a drawing, one of Russell's drawings. He does a really good job, takes hours and hours drawing these beautiful pieces of art. And we send those out to one of you guys every month. So if you sign up to be a monthly donor, please do that. It will help us a lot, and you get a chance to win.
Yep, go to freethestates.org/donate to become a monthly supporter. We would very much appreciate it. There's important work to be done. Even if the recent leak of the Alito draft is true, even if Roe is about to be overturned, there is lots of work to do to make preborn children equal under law here in Oklahoma and in many states around the country. This battle is far, far from over, and so we need you guys' continued support. And if you aren't supporting yet, now is a great time to become a supporter because we could really use it. So
yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and this has been another episode of the Liberator Podcast, where we're committed to being as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. We'll see you next week.